Hello, good evening, everyone. You're all very, very welcome to this special Abolish Abortion NI Pro Life Hustings event. We do apologize. We're just starting a little bit late. We've had some technical issues getting some of our guests in, and we do hope to have everybody in here very, very shortly. And thank you so much for joining with us here. I know it's a late start, but we do know a lot of candidates have been out canvassing today. And so we decided to go for an 8:30 start just to allow them that extra time out on the doorsteps. Just a couple of announcements for you just before we begin our event. We are delighted to have a number of parties represented. They will be introducing themselves very shortly, but we have Samuel Morrison from the TUV. We have Peter Tobin from Into. We also are hoping to have Paul Gibbon from the DUP and Len Beattie from the Heritage Party. So that is our lineup for tonight. Other parties were invited, and I'll be outlining some of the responses that we've had from some of those other parties, maybe just a little bit later. But can I ask you to please share the live stream wherever you are, if you're on Facebook or if you're on YouTube, please share the live stream and let's get this event out to a large and wider audience across Northern Ireland. But before we begin into our event proper, I'm going to ask Pastor Clive. He's just going to share a short message with us. And then after that, Mark will just give us a short political update, and then we will get to the parties. So over to you, Clive.
Evening, everyone, and thank you all so much for tuning in tonight. And it's a privilege, really, to be able to share at this level in what is a very busy schedule for all of you. One of the things that I have done is spend a lot of time going through the various manifestos. And as I've done that, a thought came to me that I just want to share with you, and that is this. I thought to myself, well, if God was to write a manifesto, and of course I believe that God has written a manifesto, what would he include and what would be priority? Abolish Abortion NI, we're unashamedly, we don't want just to be Bible believing Christians. We want to be Bible behaving Christians. We don't just want to speak about things. We want to be actively participating and joining with the help of the Lord in fulfilling his manifesto. And one of the things that struck me right from the beginning, I suppose we would say in the Old Testament, in the Ten Commandments, that perhaps summarizes the manifesto of God. And in the New Testament, the Beatitudes perhaps summarizes the manifesto of the Lord Jesus. So from the Old Testament to the New Testament. And those were the things that he gave, the laws that he shared for his people and the nation of Israel to follow. And the other thing that struck me was that so often the leaders misunderstood and indeed rejected what God had revealed. So in fact, in Scripture, as I was thinking about this, you get this cycle in Scripture of revelation. God reveals his manifesto. You get rejection, rebellion, and then retribution. And as I thought through that, I thought that we are at a crisis. There's without a doubt we are at a moral crisis in our land, north and south, at the moment. And if God were just to open for us for a moment what his manifesto, what's on his heart, what would that be? I started thinking how the prophets of old, the spiritual leaders of old, they so often misunderstood what God was saying to them. Jeremiah is called the reluctant prophet. Ezekiel was told he had to speak whether people listened or didn't listen. When Jonah was commissioned, Jonah didn't like it so much that he ran the other direction. And eventually, whenever he proclaimed God's word and people turned to God, he was more concerned about God causing a gourd to wither than he was with 100,000 people turning to the Lord. And you find that all the way through. Elijah, one of the greatest spokesmen, leaders in the Old Testament, had a calling down fire ministry and a calling down rain ministry, yet ended up feeling that he had not understood the manifesto of God, so that he wanted to die literally. And even in the time of Jesus, the disciples, not just the Pharisees and the Sadducees and the religious leaders, but the disciples so often misunderstood what Jesus' mission was, the manifesto of the Messiah. And really, what I want to just say, as I came through this, I started really, as I read the manifestos of all the political parties, I tried to parallel those manifestos with what I was finding in Scripture, what God was concerned about. In Genesis, when God made man in his image, and every single person created in the womb, an image bearer of the living God. And even when there was a struggle in the womb of Rebekah, it's interesting that God calls the two children, Jacob and Esau, they were babies in the womb. Jeremiah was told that before he was formed, the Lord knew him. And of course, Psalm 139 speaks the wonderful picture of being fearfully and wonderfully made in the womb by God, created in the image of God. And for me, over the years, one of the most powerful things that has come to my heart and mind has been in Luke chapter 1, verse 43. Whenever the Virgin Mary visited Elizabeth, and it says John the Baptist leaped for joy in the womb. And the word used in the original is brephos, for child in the womb. And the word used for child out of the womb is the word brephos. So whenever we look at history, and even in the Ukraine at the present time, the things that really catch our attention, whether it's the Holocaust and the Second World War, or Stalin, or all the Armenian genocide, whether it's what's going on today throughout the world, they take precedence because people are aware, because people can visualize, they can see it visually, what is happening, the tragedies that are happening. And yet my conviction is right at the end of the Sermon on the Mount, when Jesus said, seek first my kingdom and my righteousness. And that is God's manifesto. Because the multitudes cannot see what's happening in the womb, the obliteration of women, the obliteration of children in the wombs of women. And for me, looking back, and I lived through all the years from the first civil rights march, I was there, right the way through the Troubles, 3,720 deaths. And society was abhorred, by and large, the majority, prayed and pleaded for that horrific thing to stop. 47,000 people injured. And yet, in just what, a year and a half, 2 years, over 3,000 in the north, and in the whole of the island, 23,000 babies have been murdered in the womb. And for me, whenever I go to the political leaders, the leaders that we want to see placed there by God in authority, and I want to see what are the things that are on their heart. Are the things that are on their heart the same things that are on God's heart? Then I have to be honest with you, I get an incredible shock. Because of all the manifesto of God can be summed up with love the Lord your God with all your mind, with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. Then every single day in the UK, one child is killed every 3 minutes, 200,000 a year. The horror of that We know that the media suppresses this truth. We know that we're misrepresented. But the horror of that, to me, hasn't grasped Christians the way it ought to have. And for me, what I would love to ask the political parties, not just what your position is on pro-life, but what is your priority? What is your strategy? What are you actually going to do to bring about the abolition of child murder in the womb? And I hope that doesn't come over too strong, but quite honestly, I'm reaching that time in my life when I've seen terrorists on both sides using the Armalite to obliterate humanity, to take lives. Now it's done with medical, chemical abortions. It's done in surgeries and clinics. And it's because we don't see it that it seems not to make that impact. We may be more concerned about the protocol, or we may be more concerned about even health care. And to me, whenever I think that abortion is referred to as health care, it absolutely makes me cringe. And I'm convinced that it makes God cringe too. And so, really, what I would love you to share tonight as you open your hearts to us, not just your position. Obviously, we know where the SDLP and Sinn Féin and the Green Party and Alliance and all the rest of them really stand on the issue now. But for those who stand as pro-life, it's what priority, what strategy, what are you prepared to do, even outside the abortion clinics where we're we're now we're now being banned from, and I say this reverently and respectfully, it will not stop us doing that. We obey God rather than man. And it will not stop us doing whatever we can do to be advocates for the unborn, to be ambassadors for Jesus, to proclaim the culture and the message of life over the culture and the message of death. And I suppose tonight is a very special night for me because I want to say this. Those of you who are on, and I'm so grateful to each and every one of you. I'm going to come back later and say this. When I've looked at the manifestos, it's the TUV, it's there, the destruction of life in the womb in small writing under the moral values. I couldn't find it in the DUP manifesto. With aim to it is right at the top, pro-life. And the only other party that I could find it in the center of was actually the Heritage Party, where it was right in the center of their manifesto, the culture of life. Now, if that seems like a criticism, I want it to be an observation. And I want it to be an observation whereby, number one, you come back and share the position, the priority, the strategy. And also think about this: how can we support one another? Whatever differences we have on other issues, whether those issues are national issues, whether they're social issues, whatever the issues are, the thing that unites the parties that we're speaking to, co-belligerence, means that there is a place to stop the murder of thousands of innocent children, where we put aside other things that are not major for me, and I believe in God's eyes are not major. We put aside those things and we commit ourselves where we agree that this horror, this Holocaust has to stop. And from me tonight to you, as someone who has been pro-life and active in different SPUC, life, care, different organizations over the years, and whose heart is broken, quite honestly, tonight as I sit and share this with you, I want to plead with you. Don't let the things that separate us stop us from doing whatever it takes together to see the darkness of child murder stopped. I'm going to hand over to Mark, and I'll maybe come back at the end and say a little more. And if I've said anything to offend or whatever, please forgive me, but I feel I just need to speak from my heart tonight.
Just before Mark begins there, I just want to welcome Paul and Len. I know you just got in just after the introduction, so I just want to let you know we really appreciate you being with us tonight. And to everyone else who is joining us on the live streams, can I just ask you to please share the live stream and do get this word out wider and further. So over to Mark, and then we're going to be going to the parties then one after the other. They'll have an opportunity to have just 3 to 5 minutes introduction. We'll start with Paul Gibbon of the DUP. We'll go to then to Peter Tobin of Intu, then Samuel Morrison of TUV, and then Glenn Beattie of the Heritage Party in that order. So, but over to you, Mark, just for a brief political update. Thanks, Mark.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you, Clive, for bringing that message to us. So I want to start off this evening by setting the scene and outlining where things currently stand with regards to the abortion in Northern Ireland and how we got here. Many of you will know that in 2019 at Westminster, while the Assembly was not running, the Westminster government forced upon Northern Ireland an extreme abortion regime, very much against the will of the people here. 79% of those who responded to the consultation said they were against the imposition of abortion, and subsequent to the 2019 Section 9 legislation, the Secretary of State has moved further regulations at Westminster. Now, the reality of these regulations is that we now have a situation in Northern Ireland where the abortion regulations are controlled from Westminster by the Secretary of State, and he has the ultimate authority over everything abortion related in Northern Ireland. That includes the abortion regulations, which are among the most extreme in the whole of Europe. It includes relationship and sexual education. He has a duty to change our RSE programs in school if we don't, and also it's been almost on him to criminalize Christians outside abortion clinics who are offering support. Now, as many of you will know, on the very last day of the Assembly in March, the Stormont Assembly voted in favour of a bill from Claire Bailey that will take that step to criminalise those offering support outside abortion clinics. That bill relied very heavily on evidence that was given by the Belfast Trust to the Committee for Health, evidence that we showed had been vastly manipulated in the lead up to the evidence session that they gave. 7 incidents being recorded on a single day by a single person, just a couple of weeks before the evidence session that the Belfast Trust gave to the Committee for Health, and the Belfast Trust continue to drag their heels in terms of giving the information and allowing access to the information on those incidents. So we are now in a situation, as Clive was saying, where the Secretary of State is due to step in after the election. If the executive don't commission, he has said he will fully commission abortion services. Despite the fact that we don't have commissioned abortion services in Northern Ireland, a bunch of rogue doctors and nurses have taken it upon themselves to perform abortions, and so far have claimed the lives of over 3,000 children in the womb in just over 2 years. So that sets the scene for where we are at the moment. So Wesley, I'm going to hand over to you, and then you can let the guys introduce themselves.
Okay, Mark, thank you so much for that update, and we'll be covering some of these issues in more detail in a little while. But anyway, I think we'll just move now to introduce our panel. And first up is Paul Gibbon of the DUP. Paul, you're a very well known person in Northern Ireland, former First Minister. You're very welcome. So you have three to 5 minutes to share with us. Thank you. Yeah. Paul, can you hear us? No. I think he's having some. Paul, can you hear us, or can you? Is your? Yeah. Okay. Paul, your mic is not working. Unfortunately, your mic is not working. Paul, we'll come back to you in a wee second. We'll go to Peter, and then we'll come back to you. So we'll try and get your mic working. Thanks. Over to you, Peter. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Can you hear me there?
Yes, we can. Yeah.
Excellent, excellent. Listen, first of all, I want to thank you sincerely for the opportunity to address you here today. And thank you very much for including us in this discussion. For people who don't know who we are, Aontú is a brand new political party. We're 3 years old. We're an all-Ireland party. We have elected reps from Wexford to Derry, and we have members right through the island of Ireland. One of our core values, as people will know, is the human rights to life. We believe that the rights to life is a human right, and we simply want to protect everybody's human rights to life. The whole idea of a human right is that it's meant to be universal, and universality means it covers everybody. And the unborn child is obviously a living, individual human being. So if you take out a section of humanity out of a human right, it's no longer a universal human right anymore. And obviously, we have, like many people, been shockingly frustrated at what's happened north and south over the last 3 years. And that's one of the reasons why we were founded. We were founded after the referendum in the south of Ireland. And shockingly, and some of the speakers have alluded to this, already in 3 years, 23,000 unborn human beings have been aborted in those 3 years. That's the equivalent of 900 classrooms of children who are simply not here with us today due to the new legislation that has been imposed. And some people often say that, well, if you don't have abortion here, people will travel to England for abortion. But we know the year after abortion was legalized in the south of Ireland, there was a jump of 40% in the number of abortions that were taking place. And that's because access was made so much easier. One of the difficulties we have at the moment is that the media are doing a significant job, in my view, of trying to not talk about abortion. So before abortion was legalized, it was in the papers every day. It was on the news every week, on the television and the radio. Since abortion has been legalized, it's practically been invisible, and that's the same north and south. And it struck me that I've spoken to 3 very senior journalists over the last 3 days in relation to abortion, and they've all told me that they did not realize the extent of the legislation for abortion. So we have a situation where Sinn Féin and the SDLP have voted for abortion up until birth for a child with disabilities. So not alone is obviously wrong for the rights to life to be taken from somebody, but there's also now a discriminatory element within legislation. And those two parties have flipped radically from their policies in relation to this before. In a debate that one of my colleagues in Mid-Ulster, Alexandra Halliday, had with a journalist that was reported over the weekend, the journalist only wanted to talk to her about abortion in the most difficult cases of rape. And Alexandria gave a very humane response about the need to support the victim and the survivor of the rape, the need to make sure there's proper policing so that the criminal is apprehended and is punished, and the need for rape crisis centres, etc. But the headline was completely oblivious to that. And indeed, the purpose of the journalist's article was to frame the discussion on the most heartbreaking and most difficult of cases, even though they account for 0.01% of those cases. They're extremely important, absolutely. But unfortunately, the media and the political establishment don't want to talk about the 99.9% of abortions that take place. 98% of abortions happen on healthy babies and healthy mothers, and unfortunately, they're not being discussed. And actually, it came to light in the South when we had the referendum that 85% of abortions happened because of the socioeconomic circumstance of the mother. So that the mother may feel that she doesn't have an economic choice. And it always shocks me that many of the political parties that say that they are pro-choice have actually implemented economic policies to make mothers feel like they don't have a choice. And in the south of Ireland, we have a situation now where mothers are homeless giving birth. So where's the support for women in that? One of the key questions, I think it was Clive that mentioned at the start, what were the strategies, etc., that we have in relation to protecting life? One of our key strategies is obviously to build political support, and we want to build political support by talking to people about the bread and butter issues that they face. And we believe that, you know, we want to also hammer home the idea that we want to make sure that mothers have the economic supports that are necessary so that they can raise their child to their full potential. And that's a really important element to us. I often get asked, how were the pro-abortion campaigners so successful? And my view is simple. It's not that there's so many of them, but what they are is they're extremely politically engaged. They're also phenomenally strategic. And the third issue, the most important factor in their success, has been their ability to work together. Now, I believe that one of the greatest weaknesses that people who support the right to life have is our inability to work together. And it strikes me that people from the unionist community and from the nationalist community, we actually share so much in terms of values. And those values are being attacked significantly. And we have no choice but to work together, in my view, to reach out to each other and work on common ground for common objectives. It's also, I will say, it's also shocked me. Like I put in so much work over the last 3 years in building this organization. And, you know, we'll talk to people and people regularly say, we're with you 100% on the right to life issue. And I'd say, well, what's the most important issue for you? And they'd say it's the right to life. And I would say, well, why don't you give us a hand? They'll say, well, what's your policy on, you know, maybe climate change or something else that's obviously less significant? And I'd give them my policy and they'd say, oh, no, we can't work on you. We can't work with you in relation to that. There's pro-life people need to be able to see the big picture, the real objectives and the real importance, and be able to sometimes tolerate differences in relation to the smaller stuff. As the saying goes, we need not to sweat the smaller stuff, but to focus on the big issues. So our objective in this election is to win seats. We have 12 candidates across the north. There's 4 constituencies that we have a good chance of taking a seat in: West Belfast, East Derry, Foyle and Fermanagh, South Tyrone. And I will say this, some of those vote seats will be won on the basis of who unionists give their preference to. Now, I'm not asking the unionists to vote for a nationalist party if they don't want to. But what I will say, your transfers could make the difference between a pro-abortion nationalist MLA or a pro-life nationalist MLA. How you use your transfer in this election could actually get people across the line to make the differences in votes in Stormont. And while obviously we believe in self-determination, and we believe that Westminster has no rights to impose this law on the north of Ireland, it is key for us to make sure that if Stormont can have a majority that stands up for the human rights to life, it will make it far harder for the Westminster government to look for the cover that it needs to impose this upon our people. So I'm not sure where I am in relation to time on that, but that's a brief outline of what we stand for, how we frame our objectives, our strategy in achieving it. And we would reach out to people, you know, forget about the small differences, work for the big picture.
Peter, thank you so much for your introduction and your remarks. And I would ask if anyone has any questions or comments for the candidates on the panel tonight to please put them in the chat, and we'll endeavour to get to that at our question and answer time. I am very sorry, Paul, Gibbon is having technical difficulties getting on. So, Paul, do try to come back on if you possibly can, and we'll try and see if we can get your microphone working. But unfortunately, we're not able to hear you. So do come back on. I'm going to ask now Samuel Morrison of the TUV to speak. Thanks, Samuel.
Thanks very much, Wesley, and thanks to Abolish Abortion and I both for the opportunity to be here tonight and to present the case of my own party, and indeed for the work that you have done, you yourself, Wesley, and your colleagues have done throughout this assembly, the former assembly term, on the issue of abortion. I know when any of those issues have become live and there's anything on the horizon, you guys have been straight onto it and have been lobbying and trying to do what you can to influence the powers that be on these matters. So kudos to yourselves for those efforts. TUV
Sorry,
itself,
can I just stop you there, Samuel? Paul, I just want to check your mic is working. Say hello. Can you speak there, Paul? No. Paul? No. Okay, sorry, Samuel, go ahead.
That's okay. That's okay. No, I mean, anybody that's involved in any of these experiments with Zoom and whatnot knows what it's like and knows what Paul is going through at the moment. I've been there myself, so I have a lot of empathy with him tonight. You put the effort in, set the time aside, and then the technology just won't play ball. So no apologies necessary there. But I think there are some points that I would make that are specific to TUV, and there's some points that I would like to come back on that Peter Tobin has made as well there. But just to be clear, my own party has been unapologetically pro-life from its inception. We have 5 foundation principles, and one of those is the defence of traditional family values. And we've always interpreted that to mean that we believe life is precious from conception. And we have fought at every stage to try and defend the life of the unborn. We're very, very clear on that, both in our manifesto and I just took a quick look at our manifesto there. I see that in the manifesto document itself, a full 20% of the health section is taken up with dealing with the issue of abortion. There's another section in the manifesto which deals with moral issues and it talks about abortion. And again, in the leaflet that goes into every home in the country, we have to cover a lot of issues. You're trying to get everything in there. And we also thought it was important to nail our colours to the mast on the pro-life issue and got that into every home in the country. So nobody can be in any doubt about where we stand. And I think it's not just a matter of talking about that, but it's what we've done in the Assembly in the past term. Now, the past Assembly term has been a disastrous one for the pro-life cause. And frankly, it's very difficult for me, having worked in politics for 15 years, to have seen the reversals that the pro-life cause has suffered in a single Assembly term. To go from a situation where the vast majority of MLAs professedly were pro-life to end up at a point where, when Paul was moving his private member's bill, which was bringing in modest changes to the abortion legislation, could not get it through just to protect the lives of the children that were born, would potentially be born with disabilities, and to see that defeated and to see the bile that the pro-life voices in the Assembly had to put up with just for even suggesting that that should be done was very enlightening and very, very disheartening as well about where politics was in Northern Ireland. But what can politicians do? I think one of the things that Pater made that was a fair point is the press likes to obscure the reality of this, likes to hide the scale of it. I think one of the things that TUV has tried to do and Jim has tried to do in the Assembly is to draw back the curtain on that subject. Like those figures that were cited at the start of the discussion there, about 3,000 abortions and things like that. Those are the sort of things that Jim has been highlighting when it came to Assembly questions, asking how many abortions have been carried out, trying to find out the reasons for them, etc. And there are other things that the politicians can do as well. And I would say this to members of the public: your vote does matter. I mean, if we talk about the Clare Bailey bill, for example, which has criminalised people, or will criminalise when it gets royal assent, criminalise people for holding up a placard with the words of the Sixth Commandment on it. Somebody goes out and stands outside an abortion clinic with a placard which simply reads, "Thou shalt not kill." They run the risk of being criminalised. And there were amendments that were moved to that that Jim tabled that would have taken some of the teeth out of that. There was an effort on the part of the DUP and the TUV to vote the bill down, indeed. And it came to the bit on it. It would just take one more MLA to have made the difference between the bits of that bill getting through and bits of it being stopped, because that's how short we were in terms of getting the 30 signatures on a petition of concern to stop that bill. And there was 29 prepared to do it. There wasn't a 30th. And I think that's something that people should reflect on when it comes to casting their vote and whether it is worthwhile. But I would make this point as well. I disagree with Pater on one aspect of what he said. I agree on another. I'll tell you what I agree with first of all. There are grounds on which we can work together, in which we can find common cause with those of a pro-life perspective, regardless of our position on the constitutional issue and other things. Pater, for example, is running a candidate in Foyle, Emmett Doyle, who I know reasonably well because he worked in Stormont with a member of the SDLP, and we were friendly at that time. And we got friendly largely because of our mutual interest in the pro-life issues. So there's merit in that, and that point can be made. But I would make this point as well. In any normal government, before government is formed, parties come together, they discuss what they're going to agree on, what their programme for government is, what the policies are that they want to bring forward. And if Northern Ireland had that sensible form of government, a form of government that is able to work, that is able to function, that is able to deliver for people, that is tried and tested throughout the world, people could come to a panel like this tonight and could tell you that my party will make it the condition of entering government with anybody that we are going to be pro-life government, that we're going to bring forward legislation that changes the situation in Northern Ireland, where we have the most liberal abortion regime in Europe. The reality is that under the current system of government that we have in Northern Ireland, that is not the case. And every major party is entitled, as of right, to positions in government. That's ludicrous, and it shouldn't be the case. And the other point that I would make is that the Stormont, when it did come back, after the hiatus caused by the RHI scandal and other related matters, but when it did come back, it came back as a result of a piece of legislation called the Northern Ireland Executive Formation Act. And it was Stella Creasy who moved an amendment to that act, which brought in the abortion changes. And Stormont, as it is constituted at the moment, is constituted on a piece of legislation which brought in that radical abortion change. So we can blame Westminster all we like, but if we do that, forever and a day, we also need to be cognizant of the fact that Stormont only came back because of a piece of legislation which contained within it the changes which brought in the abortion changes in Northern Ireland. And it is my view that at that point, it should have been made very clear to Her Majesty's government that if they were going to try and bring back devolution on that basis, then devolution was not worth coming back for. That's my own opinion on the matter, and where I stand on it. But I think one of the key points that I would make about this is, I mean, your colleague at the start, Wesley, you'll forgive me that I've forgotten the pastor's name. He asked us what we can commit to doing in this assembly. We can commit, on my own part, to attempting to highlight this issue, to expose it, to put the spotlight of truth upon it. And I think there's a lot of merit in all of those things, particularly if you look at the abolition campaign that William Wilberforce ran so successfully over so long. How did he get to where he was? He came from a position where no one was supporting him to where he was carrying the whole of the country with him. Everybody could see the evil of abortion. How did he get there? He got there incrementally by exposing what slavery actually meant, by exposing what it was doing to individuals, by humanizing those who were being subjected to slavery. And I think we have to do those things in Stormont as well. We need to be shining a light into the darkness that is abortion, and to bringing the reality of it home to individuals. But it would be remiss of me to sit here tonight, Wesley, and to tell your viewers that if you vote TUV, or if you vote TUV and you transfer to the other pro-life parties, then we're going to see a radical change in Northern Ireland on this abortion issue. It's going to be very difficult, because under the system of government that we have in Northern Ireland, once these changes have been brought in, it's very, very difficult to reverse them. It requires cross-community support, and it requires legislation to be able to be brought forward without being blocked by 30 MLAs signing a petition of concern. So one of the things that I would say tonight is, yes, our party is committed to be a voice for the unborn. It's committed to fight on this issue as hard as we can, but it will do so without leading people up the garden path and telling them that this issue is going to be easy. And one of the issues that, I'll close with this point, one of the issues that I have found on the doors is that there are a lot of people who would have swallowed what they would have regarded as the morally questionable things about devolution in Northern Ireland in relation to having, frankly, terrorists in government, swallowed that in order to protect sanctity of marriage and to protect the unborn. And those people are lost to the people that are sold on devolution. And it is an issue that is coming up on the doorstep. What is the point of Stormont if Westminster can do that, and if Stormont just comes back on that basis? And it may not be a very palatable message. It may not be a message that sounds very optimistic, but I think it's the reality for the pro-life movement in Northern Ireland that this is very, very, very difficult to recover from. Thank you very much.
Samuel, thank you so much for sharing with us on the TUV perspective on pro-life at this point in time. We really appreciate that. We are really sorry that Paul Gibbon is not able to get in and not able to hear us and is not able to speak. And we're trying to resolve it, but unfortunately at this point in time he isn't able to speak. And also Glenn is having internet problems. I want to go back to Mark and then to Clive. And Mark, I don't know if you're able to identify some questions or issues that have been raised. If Mark or Clive want to come in there just now in response. First of all, Mark, if that's possible.
Yeah. No problem. Yes, so we have been listening very intently, and we thank you for the contributions that you've made so far. And I think one of the first ones that, we've 77 people currently watching online, and no doubt some of them are pro-abortion activists watching in to see what the parties have to say on this issue. So first question for the two of you who remain at the minute, and for Paul and Glenn, if we manage to get them back, is that you're men. Why should you, as men, get a say on this issue?
Yeah, I'll go to Samuel first, and then Peter first, and then Samuel. Yeah.
So first of all, a human right is a human right, and it's a universal right. So if there was a threat to the human right of people of color, and I stood by and put up my hands and said, I'm not a person of color, I should not be involved in this discussion. I have no rights to be involved in this discussion. People would obviously call that out as being absolutely ridiculous. And also, it has to be noted that actually abortion attacks people who are most vulnerable in society, obviously the unborn child, but a person is more likely to have an abortion if they are female. A person is more likely to be aborted, I should say, if they're a female. So people might not heard about gendercide. This is a situation which happens all around the world. It is evidenced in many reports that are accepted in the UN and elsewhere. And this shows that in some cultures, a male child is seen as more valuable. And if there is pressure, financial pressure or legal pressure in terms of how many children a family can have, often what happens is the female child is aborted specifically for her gender. And it's an incredible situation that you would have 100 million missing women in the world due to gender-side abortion or gender infanticide. And yet that's an issue that people who say they stand up for women's rights never articulate whatsoever. Abortion obviously affects people with disabilities far more. You're far more likely to be aborted if you have a disability. In countries such as Iceland and Denmark, where abortion up until birth for disabilities has been legal for a long while, it is very rare where a child actually makes it to term with a disability. And that is for a society that treated people with disabilities shockingly up to 70, 80, 90 years ago and shut them away from society, and then actually learned in an enlightened fashion to make them included and equal members in our society, now to be going down the direction of aborting on the basis of disability is absolutely shocking. And then as well, you're more likely to be aborted if you're poor. In America, in Scotland, in other states where they record this information, abortion is far more likely for people in low socioeconomic backgrounds. So if people want to approach this argument on the basis of equality, I welcome that 100%, because actually that's the argument that we make an aim to. And I will say the majority of our members are female, and they are as pro-life, strongly pro-life as I am. So, I just think it's an unfair point to make, an unfair argument to make, to say that half the population of the planet cannot have a say in relation to a human right that involves the taking of another human being's life.
Okay, thank you so much, Peter. Samuel, just briefly, and then we're back to Mark for more questions.
I think Peter made a lot of good points very articulately and very well, probably better than I will, but I would add two things to that. Earlier this afternoon, I stood on the doorstep of a lady in Lagan Valley because I was canvassing before I came along to this event, and she had a notice on her door listing all of the MLAs at Stormont and the parties at Stormont who had voted in favour of legislation voted against the legislation which would have protected children who were going to be born with disabilities. And she had written on the notice on her door, "In this house there is a Down syndrome child. You are not welcome if you have voted in favour against this legislation." I was very welcome there from that lady, by that lady, and I make no apology for articulating her viewpoint tonight as best I can, and to be setting forward those issues. The other point I would make would be this. If we look back at many of the moral evils in society of former generations, and I've already alluded to the issue of slavery, are we really saying that William Wilberforce, as a white Englishman who had no experience of being either a plantation owner or a slave, should have had no opinion on slavery? Are we saying that the northern soldiers who fought in the American Civil War on the side of the abolitionist cause should not have fought because they weren't black, because they weren't slaves, because they had no experience of the slave system that operated in the southern states at that time? It's a preposterous argument, and it's one that doesn't stand up to any scrutiny, in my opinion.
Thank you so much, Samuel. Okay, back to Mark. Any further questions that have come in? Thanks.
The films that I watched recently was the film The Untouchables, where Elliot Ness is a treasury agent, tried to take down Al Capone, and there's a scene in it where Sean Connery's character sits down with him and says, "What are you willing to do? Are you willing to do stuff that goes beyond what is necessarily acceptable in order to take down the evil of Al Capone?" And for us as an organization, we regard this as such a serious issue that we believe there are instances we must defy the law in order to obey God. And one such issue is with the position of the Minister of Health. Has effectively washed his hands on the deaths of 3,000 children in the last 2 years. That has happened under his department and under his authority. So if your parties were in a position where you could take the position of Minister of Health, would you defy Westminster instructing the trusts to immediately halt all abortions that are happening there?
I'll go to Samuel first and then Peter after that.
Okay. I would be misleading you if I didn't make clear that my party is committed to fundamental reform of the Stormont system. I've already outlined to you in my previous comments how the present Stormont system is incapable of delivering for the pro-life community in Northern Ireland. Once this legislation is in, it is virtually impossible to remove. There are no circumstances under which a TUV member of the Assembly would take health or any other health ministerial position, because the system in Northern Ireland is fundamentally flawed. And no issue, arguably, illustrates that more forcefully and more clearly than the issue of abortion, where the law is virtually impossible to change, regardless of whether or not the Assembly had a pro-life majority. So no, we would not take the health ministry. We're opposed to the system of government. It's unworkable. And if you knocked enough doors in the Assembly campaign, you wouldn't be too long before you found people that were taking that view that the whole system is in need of fundamental root and branch reform. And I think that the issue of abortion highlights that the system is broken. The system does not work. And the fact that when it comes to certain things, Westminster is even prepared to act over the heads of the Assembly. And the issue of abortion does not highlights the how impotent Stormont is and the pointlessness of it, rather than a great opportunity for anybody who's health minister or any other portfolio to take a great stand on anything, because I have not seen any minister do that. I'm disappointed with the position that Robin Swan has taken. I agree with the sentiment of the question. However, as I say, we would not be taking the health ministry or any other portfolio. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Samuel. I'm just going to ask again, Paul, can you hear me? Paul Gibbon?
Yes, Wesley, I can, if you can hear me.
Okay, Paul, great. We can hear you and you can hear us at long last. And thank you so much for bearing with us. We really appreciate it. Paul, sorry, before we'll go back to you, Peter, after Paul has had an opportunity to share. So if you want to just open up there with 3 to 5 minutes or so, Paul, and then we'll let you speak. So go ahead there, Paul. You're very welcome.
Thank you, and apologies. I heard Clive at the start, and then as soon as it went to Mark, it dropped, and I couldn't hear anyone, and then I think you couldn't hear me, and I had to reboot my system and all of that. So hopefully the connection will stay with me, but I was able to hear Clive at the start, and again, good to hear from Clive again. I suppose, I got into the Assembly back in 2012, June 2012, yeah. Or 2010, sorry, it's 12 years ago. And one of the single biggest issues for me was to champion the rights of the unborn child or the preborn child. And as a Christian, it was something that I had often heard messages from ministers about, and legislation which was contrary to God's word. And that was something that I very much prayed about, what I should do in terms of my own profession and career. And I felt we ought to be salt and light, as the Bible tells us, in every aspect of society, and that's equally true in the political arena. And that's what ultimately motivated me to get involved in politics. And from I was an MLA, I immediately joined the all-party group, and the pro-life group, which was then chaired by the SDLP's Pat Ramsey, and worked closely with him on numerous attempts to change the legislation. Whenever I was the chairman of the Justice Committee, sought to have pro-life legislation in the Assembly. And indeed, whenever Sinn Féin kept the Assembly down for 3 years, and then Westminster intervened over our heads, I sought to recall the Assembly and try and bring in legislation again to prevent what Westminster was doing to us. And within this mandate, I have been the only MLA to bring forward pro-life legislation through the Severe Fetal Impairment Bill, which of course I appreciate the support which came from other pro-life members of the Assembly and in the TUV and some SDLP and indeed some Ulster Unionists. But I think in a sign of the times, that was defeated by 2 votes, 45 against and 43 in favour in terms of that bill. And that was something which I had invested a lot of energy in to try and demonstrate that there was still a pro-life majority within the Assembly to try and change the law. I appreciate that for some within the pro-life movement, they would rather an absolutist position was taken, and I think this is a point of difference that does exist. However, I think we are all united in the same ultimate objectives, but the tactics to achieve that, I think it is a point of disagreement, but it shouldn't be one which damages relationships within the wider pro-life cause when it comes to that. So my party has always been pro-life. I know Clive said he hadn't seen it. He can be patient. It's one of the fruits of the spirit, Clive, to have long suffering. Our manifesto is being launched on Thursday, and I don't think you'll be disappointed in terms of the content around the pro-life issue whenever our manifesto is made public. So I'm very much committed to ultimately trying to have pro-life laws through Stormont. We are faced with challenges all around us. We have very little allies on this. Westminster is no friend, and for those that advocate direct rule, they're advocating to give the powers directly to Westminster, which actually brought these laws in. And I do always seek to use our place at Stormont to challenge legislation, to frustrate it where possible. That includes around the commissioning of the services that the Department of Health have sought to take forward, and the Secretary of State continues to try and pursue, and I've no doubt will seek to do that. And so I will use every political lever available to us to try and frustrate these attempts. But if anybody believes that being run by London will advance the pro-life cause, it absolutely will not. And we need to seek to try and elect as many pro-life Assembly members as we can. And that also exists across all stages of life. So my party, from conception, life should be protected. And then whenever you're born, we should be providing support to people that need it. And it also when it comes to end of life and human dignity at the end of life. And so, of course, we're opposed to euthanasia and assisted suicide, because it isn't just at the pre-born stage that should happen. But I think we also accept the reality, of course, is that we can have, as we once did have, very good legislation that protected life, but it didn't stop people from getting on a boat or a plane and having abortion across the water. And that is a reality that we have to deal with. And so how do we provide the best possible support so that people don't see abortion as the solution? Because in my view, it isn't. And so we need to provide that support in crisis pregnancies, if that's with cases where you have life-limiting conditions, where a child may only live for a number of days, die prematurely in the womb. There is a lack of services for people to continue with their pregnancy. And I hear that from mothers who feel abandoned by the health service, that they don't have support, and abortion is being presented as the solution, which it's not. And as I had a conversation today with a constituent who felt that I'm trying to dictate to women and their lives, we're not. This is a human rights issue. It's about having dignity. And I'm the father of 3 daughters. And if women's rights and a progressive society is built upon ending the life of the unborn child. That's not the kind of progressive society that I believe in. And so we had an interesting debate around all of that. But I want to protect life at all stages, and that begins at conception. And a progressive society should be protecting life, and it should ultimately, the most vulnerable are those that don't have a voice. Nobody asks the unborn about their right to life, and it should be the law that seeks to protect them. But we also need to provide services as well to people, so that they don't travel across the water, even if you did have very strong pro-life legislation. So thank you.
Okay, Paul, thank you so much for your contribution. I want to go back to Mark, just if any other questions on the chat, and maybe we'll take maybe one or two more questions, and we'll go to Peter first in responding, and then after those two or three questions, maybe Mark, you could group those questions together. I want to go back to Clive just to finish off. So, Mark, thanks.
Thank you. Yeah, so we've already briefly mentioned some of the issues around Section 9 and Northern Ireland Executive Formation Act, which effectively gives the Secretary of State control over the abortion laws. And we've seen that any attempts at changing the law in any way, he has indicated that he would challenge that in the courts. So from each of you, in terms of your party, post-election, what are your party willing to do to take a stand against Westminster to ensure that Section 9 is repealed, and that the control over these laws is back where it should be, in the hands of the people who live here and who vote here and who work here on a daily basis?
Will I jump in there? Will I?
Yeah, if you go Peter first, and then Paul second, and then Samuel.
Okay. Just the previous question that was asked would aim to, or any of the other parties, use the office of the Minister for Health to ensure that abortion services are working being rolled out in the north of Ireland. So I suppose my response to that is we will use every office that we have in our disposal, every elected platform or position that we have in our disposal, to uphold the human rights to life of every citizen on the island of Ireland. And that's our raison d'etre, and that's what we will do. And I suppose, I don't think there's an argument, because that abortion was forced upon the north by Westminster, it shows the weakness of Stormont. We believe in self-determination. The Westminster action proves we need less Westminster, not more Westminster, the truth be told. And the reason why we believe in self-determination, because we believe that decisions made close to the people that you represent are better decisions. Because one, they can influence them. Two, they can hold the people who make the decisions to account. It's virtually impossible for the people of the north of Ireland to hold decision makers in London, in Brussels, or in Berlin to account. There's just so little opportunity to do that. And the abortion legislation is proof in relation to that. Absolutely, like Aim 2's raison d'etre is to make sure that we have the human rights of everybody protected within society. And that human right is the first human right, because if you deny that human right from a person, none of the rest of the human rights can actually be guaranteed at all. So we'll, in relation to Westminster, it's actually our policy to look to devolve far more power from Westminster to Stormont. So we actually want to devolve taxation powers from Westminster to Stormont, so that like Scotland, for example, you can have a situation where the state can actually start to fund more of the public services that are so much needed. The idea of depending on the block grant to deliver public services has just become impossible in recent times. And we would definitely look to seek to devolve the power for the right to life to the north of Ireland. One thing I will say, sometimes people can focus very much on the existing law within the state. There is a very powerful power that people have, and it's the idea of people power. People power is a significant tool in the development of the laws and the political culture of a state. If you join a political party such as Aimtu, if you get involved in grassroots bread and butter work in constituencies across the country, if you help parties such as ourselves win council seats, win MLA seats, win Westminster seats, if there's a political momentum building in the direction of an organization that has your values, it is very hard, even for the likes of Westminster, to stand in the way of that level of democratic growth. So I wouldn't, while the country has flipped radically in a negative fashion in a short period of time, one of the last things we need to do is hang our heads. One of the last things we need to do is say that this is insurmountable, because we could actually defeat ourselves if we take that attitude. Like, before we even get off the ground to fight back, to be a backlash to what's happened, we can actually have the effect of sterilizing, of neutralizing our efforts. In actual fact, what we say to our members is, every leaflet that we deliver, every poster that we go up, every door that we successfully canvass is actually an opportunity to persuade people for the needs for every single person's human rights to life to be respected. And you know, the pendulum swings, but it moves in both directions. Things can change very, very quickly. So I wouldn't be despondent. I'd ask people, you know, people say to me, I'm voting for you, and I'd say, I'm delighted, thank you. And then I say, don't leave it there. Join us, give us a hand. By doing that and building the membership base, we can actually have far more impact and far more influence.
Thank you, Peter. Now to Paul Gibbon, thanks.
Thank you. Just to pick up on that with Peter, I think he's right and said in terms of the need to win hearts and minds and use every vehicle that we have politically to champion this cause. And you know, it is going to be that hard battle and that strategic approach, and it's something that transcends the nationalist debate, and Aimtu unashamedly are a party that wants the reunification of Ireland, and that's an aspiration that I respect, but it's not one that I share. But I often find common cause now increasingly with people from the Republic of Ireland on these issues rather than people in England, and so this issue does transcend the normal kind of politics, and that's important that we build that coalition. That's why I work with the SDLP pro-life members. Some that did support me. It's why I work with, albeit it's a minority now, of Ulster Unionist MLAs, because you have to build that coalition. And often there's too many people that want to say that unless you're 100% with me on this, then I'm not going to stand with you. And you have to tick every single box. We don't have that luxury within the pro-life movement. You have to try and build a broad coalition and support people where you can on this particular issue. So what would we do? Well, we need to have 3 ministers in the executive, and we will take our positions within an executive if we're able to form one, and we can then call in controversial issues. Whether we hold the Department of Health or not, we can use the call-in mechanism. And if a minister doesn't do that, then our ministerial team can deploy legal action if that's something that we're able to do. And that's something that I wouldn't be ruling out, far from it. If we need to do that and we need to have a minister to deploy legal action, then that's something that we can do to go to the courts. And I know pro-life movement organisations have done that. And so this is going to be a political strategy. It is going to be challenged in the courts. It's also about winning hearts and minds with the public. And it's about working across normal political boundaries to try and build that coalition. And if we can get 30 members, because we had 29 in terms of that bill, then yes, the petition of concern is something which you would seek to deploy if you're going to protect the most vulnerable in society. But there are some who don't support the petition of concern. There are those that do. But I would use every political vehicle and recourse to the courts and deployment of legal action where we were able to do it, if we were able to have ministerial office and have those 3 ministers. But we need to try and get more pro-life MLAs elected, and that's where people have to discern within their own areas. And if you're voting down on that value basis, who you then subsequently pass your transfers to. And it may not always be your party of first choice, but it may be your second, it may be your third, it may be your fourth. And so it's important that people would transfer also on the kind of pro-life issue to other parties as well, to try and maximise those pro-life members that we can get into the Assembly.
Okay, thank you, Paul. Samuel, do you want to respond to any of those points before we go over to Clive?
Just very quickly, I'll not detain you very long on this issue. I share the belief that people should, when they go to the ballot box, should consider the pro-life issue, and that should be uppermost in their mind when they're considering not just where they put their first preference, but where they transfer to. And I've no difficulty in saying that people should look down the ballot paper and see where the most pro-life options are. Paul and I have differences, but when I go to the ballot box, he will be getting one of my preferences, and he'll be getting a fairly high one, because I know he is pro-life and he's taken a stand on those issues. But I do differ from him on this. It is not a case of somebody just taking a ministry, and if it's taking legal action and doing this, that, and the other, that might sound okay to some people watching in on this, but the legal reality is that the Northern Ireland Executive Formation Act, the basis on which the Stormont was got up and running again, brought in the abortion regulations, brought in the most liberal abortion regime in Europe. The only way that you're going to get that changed is by pressure. In my view, it's not going to happen at Stormont. The only way you're going to get that changed is by fundamental changing the Stormont system, or making it such a big issue that you force Westminster to move on it. It's not going to be done by legal action or anything else, because the law is clear. Abortion's here. Abortion's legal. Abortion is no longer constrained by the 1867 Act or the legislation that we had here for so long. That's not the case anymore. And further, even if you have 30 MLAs, it's not going to change the fact that the other side have more than 30 MLAs, and that when that legislation is in place, the only way it can be changed is if there is not 30 MLAs on the pro-abortion side to deploy a petition of concern. So it's not, it would be fundamentally dishonest for us, anyone, to sit here tonight and to say, well, if we get so many seats or we get so many votes, then we can change things fundamentally in relation to abortion. That's not the case, because the law has been changed. The only way it's going to be got back, if at all, is if Westminster is forced to legislate on this matter, or you fundamentally change the system of government and you bring about a system whereby parties have to agree about things before they go into government, rather than just saying, well, if we get so many MLAs, then we will take a ministry. Why? Why would you take a ministry with a pro-abortion party? Why would you go in with parties that are committed to the destruction of the unborn child? There was a time when there was an argument that said we must have devolution to save the unborn. That argument doesn't exist anymore. And anyone that's trying to put forward that argument is living in a pre-Executive Formation Act world. We live in a post-Executive Formation Act world where the existence of the Assembly was predicated on the introduction of abortion in Northern Ireland. And that is a shameful basis on which to establish devolution, in my view.
Samuel, thank you so much for that. We are coming very close to the end of our evening, probably in the next 10 minutes or so. I do want to go back to Clive, and Clive, if you have any questions that you would like to ask, this is your opportunity to do that now, and also to give some final observations. And we'll also ask the panelists to give some final comments. What I would say is that the Abolish Abortion team will be back with a further presentation later this week with a debrief on tonight's meeting. We don't want to get into too much detail on some of those things, I think there's enough material for us to actually have a further discussion on. But Clive, I do want to give you some opportunity, and some folks have been asking for you to raise the buffer zone issue, particularly for those who are doing pro-life witnessing at abortion clinics.
I would like to say that for me, this has been very enlightening and very encouraging. And I want to say thank you to Paul and Pedro and Samuel. I'm sorry Glenn wasn't able to contribute. And it's good to see you, Paul, and I look forward to the manifesto. I nearly called you Alan there, but you'll forgive me for that. Pedro, this has been a real blessing and a real help to us. And Samuel, the insights that you have given, I've sort of led me to observe this, that this isn't simply looking to Stormont. It's certainly not looking to Westminster. I think that what we're actually thinking about in terms of strategy is, to go back to what Pedro said about people power. This is where you all go off me, but I was on the first civil rights march in August 1968, and if you look at whether it was Poland or wherever, when people are ordinary people are motivated, when they are sold out to standing up and being counted, they can make a difference in society. And so while we want to vote for one another, pro-life MLAs, we want to go down that road, we definitely want to see them elected back into Stormont. I think we want to go out onto the streets, going back to the question that Wesley just raised about buffer zones, where we're committed to obey God rather than men. And whatever that means in terms of the police and the legal system, then we will take that. I think that in terms of buffer zones, it will be very interesting how, in fact, they will be enforced. But I think it is time. I'm absolutely persuaded for all of us together to take our stand, and even to see MLAs coming out and standing with us at the clinics or in the streets. We still hope to move around the province as we put up the posters and educate people to what abortion really is. And go back to what Samuel said about William Wilberforce. I'm not disheartened in one sense, in that I believe that we're at the beginning of a process. We're at the beginning of a strategy. We're at the beginning of a battle, and we know that whenever we're on the right side, I've said this before, we may lose the battle, but the ultimate victory is ours. And I say that because I believe that God, whenever he works and whenever he moves in the hearts of men and women and people, he's the one who can change minds and hearts, friends. And so my observation would be, okay, we are approaching things perhaps slightly differently, and yet the unity tonight, there has been a wonderful oneness despite the difference of approaches. So I want to encourage you, I want to thank you, and I want to assure you that I will be praying for all of you and every single pro-life MLA. And if there's anything that we can do as Abolish Abortion NI, we will certainly do that to help and support you. Just let us know what we can do. And thank you again for all of you for taking time.
Okay, thank you so much, Clive. I do want to give our panelists just a sentence just to finish off with. I'll start with Pedro, and then Samuel, and then with Paul. So if you just keep it very brief, just a sentence or two, and we're going to call it quits at that. So Pedro, thanks.
You're asking politicians to be brief. You're a brave man. Just to thank you very much for the opportunity again to speak to you all, and I'm delighted that we all have so much in common in so many ways. I would say to people though, this is not going to change by itself. It will need people to put up their hand, put themselves forward, get involved, and get active. That's the only route, I believe, in the political space that will bring about change.
Okay, thank you. Samuel?
I just want to thank Abolish Abortion NI for the opportunity to be here tonight. It's been refreshing to be able to discuss these issues so frankly, and to be able to discuss it with friends almost, without feeling that every question is going to be loaded and that there's going to be the dice is going to be loaded against the pro-life voice, because I know that when you go onto the media to discuss these issues, onto Talkback, onto Nolan or anything like that, you're always very conscious that the person that's questioning you seldom, if ever, shares your opinion on this issue, and objectivity goes out the window. So it was good to be able to debate the issues and to talk about them so openly, and to be able to do it in an environment such as this. So thank you.
Thank you, Samuel. And finally, Paul, you get the last word.
Thank you, Wesley. And again, thank you, Clive, for the opportunity just to engage in this forum, and like Sammy, to be able to do it where there will be political differences, yes, amongst some of the parties here, but on this issue, we are very much at one, and we all share the same objectives. And I think on the pro-life movement and the cause, we have to be able to unite around that core objective, and navigate where there are differences, rather than trying to pull each other down from within on that. So I'll be returning the favour to Sammy into Aren't Running in Lagan Valley, Patter. So unfortunately, I'm not able to give a transfer there. If you were, it would have featured on my list. But the TUV will be high up my list, because I have worked with Jim on this issue at Parliament in Stormont on these issues, and he has been a very strong advocate for the unborn child, and I very much respect him for that, as I do those and other parties who have stood with me. On occasions, I would rather they had also been with us on other issues, but nevertheless, I still want to encourage them when they do take a stand on these issues. It may not be where I am on the spectrum, but they are there to be one on other issues that are pro-life, and I think it's important that we just keep building that coalition and building the overall movement, because it can be done, and we see it in other states in America, for example, where progress has been made, and we just have to keep working at this, because it is the single biggest human rights issue of our generation, and it's a cause that's worthy of our engagement and support in it. So thank you once again, Clive and Wesley.
Oh.
Okay, thank you so much to our panelists, to our contributors, and we really appreciate you being with us, and we're very grateful for your time tonight. Just a couple of final things. I know if you have any questions or comments, do send it in to us at info@abolishabortionni.org, and we will try and follow those up. Some of you have been requesting leaflets in respect of the election. We have no leaflets, but Precious Life do have leaflets, and you can contact Precious Life, and they might be able to help you with leafleting in your own areas in terms of pro-life candidates and pro-abortion candidates. So that's something you might find useful. But that's all for tonight. We will be back again. I think we'll be back before the election. We have a number of other things that projects that we're working on, we want to bring to you. But for tonight, I just want to say thank you to everyone for being with us, and God bless you all. Good night.